Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Turning Pages, a show that's about more than books. I have two wonderful guests with me today who both write some very interesting novels, so I anticipate a really thrilling conversation this afternoon. We have Jennifer Vaughn. Jen is here, probably recognized by all of our viewers as a personality on WMUR TV here in New Hampshire. And she is the author of 9 books. We'll talk about nonfiction at some point. And we have also Dan Lawton, who is a local author, and he also is the author of 9 novels. So we have the 9 Club today. I have read both of your books recently, and I have to thank you for some really entertaining reads that are different genres than I write myself, which is always, that's my sweet spot, is to read the kinds of books that I don't write, because I tend to not analyze except to say, wow, that's really cool, or to get caught up in the action and the characters and everything, and admire the skills that it takes to write thriller and horror and psychological stories. But before we start talking about books specifically and your careers specifically, I'm interested in knowing how you each got started in writing. Jen, you've been in television for a while, and was
100 years now.
was being a writer of fiction and nonfiction something you had always wanted to do, or was it something that came to you later during the course of your career in TV?
Always wanted to do. I loved books growing up. I read everything I could get my hands on, including the Jackie Collins books that my mom used to keep on her nightstand if they were there. Sidney Sheldon. Yep. I was grabbing whatever she was reading from a very young age. Gone with the Wind remains one of my favorites, and I think I was about 9 or 10 when I dug into that for the first time. So it was the transportation of leaving everything that you knew, everything that was around you, and jumping into this story that really, it captured me from a very young age. So as I got into TV, and you tell stories of a different sort, you tell them creative with creative visual medium, obviously for TV, but books are different because I could always see the action in my head. So I figured it's a natural jump, and I'm just gonna give this a go. So it was 2011 or so, 2012, and I wrote my first one, and off to the races we went. And like you, 9 books later, here we are. Yes. And you learn a few things along the way, you meet wonderful people along the way.
Oh, yes.
And hopefully you grow your readership so that they will give you a chance on a different genre that you haven't been writing before.
Exactly. Dan, what about you?
Yeah, so writing has always been something that's really come easily to me. So it really goes back to the school age for me. I knew in high school I wanted to be a writer. What kind of writer? I don't know. Even through college, trying to figure out what can I do professionally that'll pay me a good salary and I can have a good living. Novels wasn't it, but it's in college where I took a few courses that really sparked my interest in fiction. So one was a short story workshop where we'd go and there'd be weekly feedback, and they'd tear it up, and it was really helpful. And then there was a full script writing course where we had to draft a movie script from start to finish in the 16 weeks that the course is. That was the first thing of length that I actually finished, and I loved it and haven't stopped since.
And starting with you, Jen, how do you divide up your time between your working life, which is pretty intense, I think it's fair to say, and your writing time, and the rest of your life?
The rest of everything.
All the other parts
the rest of
life.
everything.
Yeah.
Really, it's just mornings. And I don't fall back into the category of, oh, I must write today, and if I don't, I'm a failure, my book's not moving anywhere. I have always given myself grace in this career, because if I don't get to it on a Tuesday afternoon, I will get to it by Friday. So I never have beaten myself up about that. It's actually one of the biggest pieces of advice I give to any fledgling writer or somebody who's just getting into it, who has other things going on. Let's face it, most writers do. So it's just a morning thing. Sometimes it might be writing adjacent, which means doing some research that day or editing a little bit of the chapter that I just wrote, or perhaps it's reaching out to my sources and ironing out a scene from their perspective, from the people in the field who actually do these things. So it's just in the mornings. By the time I get to work in the afternoon and evenings, that is my sole focus. That's the only thing I'm working on, the only thing I'm doing, and they're really just two separate worlds.
Mm-hmm. They're very different but connected in a way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about you, Dan?
Yeah, so my day job is traditional hours, and so I'm complete opposite to Jen. It's always been night writing. I do operate the same way that you do, though, in that I don't beat myself up about it. So out of the year, I probably only writing maybe 3 or 4 months, and the rest of it, I like the writing adjacent, thinking about what's coming next or thinking about editing. But yeah, when I get into the zone, I can churn out quite a bit in a short period of time, so I tend to stay up late, really late, too late sometimes to do it, but
that's when you're in the zone. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Good for psychological thrillers too, in the dark of night.
Yeah, it gives me energy actually, so it works out.
The first book I read of yours was The Greenhouse.
Yes.
I think you contacted me for a blurb, or anyway, I got an early read to it, and I was so excited that it won the New Hampshire Literary Award for Fiction that year, whatever year that was. But that's a book that seems to have legs. I mean, it's really but it was not your debut, was it? It was a second novel or third?
Oh, it was probably. If this is 9, it was probably like 5 or 6.
You'd written that many, okay.
Yeah, and so it was the first one that's not really a thriller. It's definitely more of a literary pacing. There is a big mystery in it though as well.
Yes.
But yeah, it was a little bit different for me. It took me a long time to write, like almost 2 years, because the subject is a little dark at times. And it's pretty personal in a lot of ways. And so, yeah, it was a bit of a challenge for me, which I enjoyed, but...
And it paid off.
It did.
Big time,
yes. It did.
Yes. Jen, I want to ask you about, you've written nonfiction as well, and you wrote Made in Hollywood about Scotty Morrow, and I've done biographical fiction about Hollywood people, Hedy Lamarr and Ginger Rogers' cousin, and my co-host Paul has written memoir of his time in Hollywood. So we're always really attuned to Hollywood stories. So I'm curious to know what it was about Scotty Morrow and what inspired you to write that story, and how you did the research for it, and what the response has been to it.
Sometimes it's a link to a person. When I wrote Shadow Kid, which is also a narrative nonfiction based on real life events, there's a gentleman from New Hampshire that book is based on. And through connections between the two of them, Scotty, who's now known as Scott, whole second career as an older gentleman now and prolific photographer. But he reached out too, because he had been holding on to this story. He was a child actor back in the heyday, the 50s and 60s. He was in every major production, TV, movies. He was on the Fox lot in the trailer next to Marilyn Monroe, and they became like a brother-sister pair. Fascinating stories. He was in the movie Peyton Place, which was cutting-edge drama at the time.
Yes, that's
1956, right. I believe. So one spoke to the other, and then that person contacted me, and he explained that he'd been sitting on this. Yes, he still lives in and around Hollywood. He still has contacts, but he wasn't into a Hollywood writer with his life story. He wanted someone who wasn't in Hollywood. And I said, well, I'm really about as far removed as Hollywood here in New Hampshire as a person can be. I like movies, but I'm certainly not in Hollywood. So we went forward with it, and those two have been my biggest award winners, the narrative nonfictions based on real life stories. And the process is, it's unique, but it's the same. For instance, I get very intimate with these subjects, and we talk all the time, whether it's a text or a call check-in, and we go chapter by chapter. So we would go every couple of days. I would check in. If it was Scotty Morrow at the time, it would be a ton of research. This was not my era, obviously. So I was digging into and becoming fascinated with all of these TV shows of the day, these big movies that he was in. His mom was his manager. He had an older brother who was in Annie, Get Your Gun. The biggest shows, the biggest directors, the biggest producers, they were intertwined and known as A-list child actors. So it was making sure that I had everything correctly. I had presented it correctly. I was writing about a little kid and the experience was through Hollywood, you know, being managed by his mom, having an agent, but his mom signing off on everything. So we were very careful to go chapter by chapter to make sure that when we moved forward, it was only after Scott had signed off. A lot of research about that, though. A lot of times watching very old movies.
And was he receptive to your take on his life and career? Did you have any disagreements, or did he urge you to make some kind of changes or to flavor it in a different way than perhaps you intended?
Not necessarily, but I would spend a lot of time cross-checking that with him, because when you're recreating dialogue, and thankfully he kept journals, as did his mom.
That's a gift.
So we could almost pluck verbatim from the journals in this instance, when he was training for this job, in this instance, when he was on, you know, the Spawn movie set, the ranch back in the day, and what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled like to be there learning how to ride these horses. So I would cross-check with him. Is that conversation exactly as you remembered it? Was that dialogue, that sentence, was the flavor of that place exactly as you remembered it? So he never objected per se, but if I was off, he would bring me back to what he remembered.
Yeah, that's great. Now, Dan, you, I read in your biography that you like rom-com movies. I'm sorry to expose you that way. Do you think you would ever write a book like that, having written the kinds of darker materials, which I'm going to ask you about in a minute, but have you ever been tempted to write something really light and fun like that, either a movie script or a novel?
Yeah, I have been tempted. The problem I have is I'm not sure I could sit with it for a full year, and so I feel like I'd get tired of it, but if I do have an author name. It would be Daniel John. You can see it on the bottom like a mass market paperback.
There you go.
Like it'd be perfect.
Once you have the vision, it's destined to happen, probably.
That's right.
Once he's thinking about it.
Once you're thinking about it. Sometimes those ideas, they never get away from you. You've done, both of you actually have done connected book series books. And Dan, you've done a 3-book series.
Yeah.
And I'm always interested, as someone who, as I was saying to Jen earlier, accidentally wrote a 4-book trilogy because it sort of was planned, but it sort of wasn't. And when you're writing series, what is your approach? Do you plot out all the books in advance and know where everything's going? Are you or do you more by the seat of the pants and say, okay, well, I've finished this one, and what do I do in the next one? How do you decide?
Yeah, it was tough for me because I am accustomed to writing standalones, and I prefer reading standalones as well. I like to start fresh with new characters and a new story. So yeah, writing a 3-book trilogy, it was definitely a challenge up front. I had to have some idea of where he was going to go, but I'm closer to a pantser than a plotter, and so I had to go out of my comfort zone a little bit and try to figure out, okay, how do we stretch this story out over 3 books? And so, you know, by the 3rd one, I was ready to be done. So.
Yeah, that's definitely the way it goes. I understand that all too well. And in The Both of Us, which I greatly enjoyed, you are, and no spoilers here, I want to be careful about that, but you're dealing with a marriage, reflecting a marriage, the power of jealousy, the desire for retribution. There's some mystery. There's peril, parenting, co-parenting in a difficult situation. Yeah. All of these things, also, and the role of a male parent and a husband, and the dynamic of that, whether good, bad, or indifferent. What, if any, of your own personal experiences these areas is there, or were you wholly drawing on imagination to build this incredible situation and these interactions with your characters? Yeah, I think a lot of my characters these days have some part of me in them. I do dramatize it, certainly, but yeah, I am a dad and I am a husband, and so I know what it's like, and a girl dad as well, and so the children are girls, and so that's a different way to go, and so yeah, I did play into some of my own experiences for sure, into the plot itself, imaginative.
So it comes from, are you guys familiar with the Dr. Laura show?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yes.
So I go through different phases of media consumption, and at the time I was listening to Dr. Laura.
Okay.
And she is just really intense, and so I was like, okay, what if you were listening and you heard somebody call into this show? And so that's where the idea came from. And the person who calls in has a secret, but she doesn't reveal the secret before she hangs up, and so that's where it starts. And that's where the idea came from the Dr. Laura show.
I'm buying that book as soon as we wrap up here.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. It was, and another technique that you used was the multiple viewpoints or dual viewpoints, I guess you would say, and both first person, one male, one female.
Yep.
And the juxtaposition of the two, the contrast of the two, the different voices, which were so well developed of those two characters. It was just a great ride. I really enjoyed reading it, and highly recommend for people who like to read psychological. It's one of those that at the end of your seat, as the roller coaster is rolling downhill towards what's going to happen and how is it going to happen. So it was very well crafted. It was really impressive.
Thank you, Margaret.
And Jen, my first question about Rattlesnake Island, which for those who are familiar with the Rattlesnake Island, as I am in Lake Winnipesaukee, this is a different Rattlesnake Island in Maine. My first question to you is, do you have terrible nightmares about monsters in the water? Because I haven't had nightmares since reading the book, fortunately. But I've been thinking about it a lot. And next time I go swimming off my dock on Winnipesaukee, I'm going to be maybe thinking about this.
Beneath, right? Yes.
Yes, but the book is, you create the atmosphere of a summer camp so well. It is just exquisitely rendered. It took me, I think anyone who reads it who's ever been to a summer camp, probably most people who read it have not been for a summer camp for troubled boys.
Yes.
But the kind of the emotions that you feel when you're in the summer camp situation, especially if you're stressed by having been in juvie, in a metropolitan juvenile detention facility. The discomfort of the physical discomfort and the unfamiliarity of suddenly being city kids out in the woods in Maine. I mean, that all in itself brings a certain tension to it. And I'm just curious how you accessed all those feelings of a teenage boy in that situation that is just really well drawn.
Thank you. I have a brother who was a teenage boy, a little bit older than me, but when I was a teenage girl. I have a son who at one point was a teenage boy. So you can almost, the angst sometimes is so visceral that comes off an adolescent, particularly these kids who are sort of thrown together because, they've broken the law, they're in the system, they're being sent away as an effort to sort of bring them back into society and civilization and get them off the track to potential being, lifers in prison. And it was the 80s, and everybody was angsty in the 80s, so it was just sort of recreating that. And you mentioned the closeness. That was a big thing, because you can feel, when you're writing a description of a scene and boys very closely packed together, you can almost smell that. So it was an effort to bring that to the reader, to let them be on that bus or in that canoe or on that little island, all packed together, managed. They knew where they had to be, they knew what they had to be doing, but yet they were still themselves. They were feisty, or they were irregular about something.
And they brought their own
reactive
relationships with them, and would those relationships change in circumstances or not, or grow and in different ways that wouldn't be expected. The other thing were the period touches. I mean, it just carried me right back to the late 1980s. You mentioned Downtown Julie Brown on MTV, Sony Walkman. That's such a period reference. New Coke, all the musical references and everything, and it was just, it really anchored the reader into that time. Maybe not all readers were alive back then, but anyway, it really gave the flavor of that time and the effect of, I guess, sort of nowadays we have social media, but the effect of popular culture on the youth that were on this journey at this camp, and the importance of these things to them.
Nothing was individualized back then. It was a block party. You know, media was a block party for people. They didn't have an algorithm on a cell phone that was individualized to their tastes, wants, and desires. Everything was thrown at them, so they all experienced this at the same time, and that sticks with you. You know, as a child of the 80s, or you remember it's a touchstone of your mom and dad grew up in the 80s. There are elements of that decade that are very particular and I think very strong, and they resonate. It resonates, and that book is told in present day and in the 1980s. But going back then, I'm sure, you know, Dan, as you research and where you set your stories too, sometimes the lack of social media is a lot of freedom in writing a story.
Yeah.
Because back in, you know, the 80s and 90s, as social media was developing in the 2000s, there's a purity almost of behavior that's not influenced by what we all now know as, you know, the presence of social media,
Right.
and we're immersed in this. But back then, it was, again, sort of when you had media, it was a mass exposure to it.
And
You
it was
could
an
have
effort to access it as well.
Yes,
Yeah, you know,
yes.
there was some serious effort to you know, to watch your Downtown Julie Brown on TV, or to have your Walkman with you at all times, and all of that.
Yeah, so it was an exercise in explaining the different worlds we live in. You know, the one back then and the one that we have now, and they're very different.
And the female character in the modern current day plot, who visits the subject that she's writing about, to what extent was this an investigative individual? I assume that a lot of personal knowledge and experience went into creating that character as well.
Yeah, so she's a young investigative reporter. She's on the hot trail of this story that seems vague, but she's going to flesh it out because she's got the passion, the energy, and she's going to be the one to do it. And investigative reporting is sort of my niche. I've been in TV for, again, 100 years. So that felt very natural too. That felt that I could get into her and explain, I'm asking you this question because I want to get to that end. I'm bringing you back to that question because I wanted to get to that end. So everything that she's developed in her young career so far is the motions and moves that I went through to become better at my craft too. So she's very easily relatable to me, but I wanted her to have, you know, a different place, whereas she goes and chases this story in the woods of way up north in New Hampshire. I probably, at the tender age of 22 and 23, would not have set out on my own, to chase a story with a character that may or may not have been involved in a really salacious and tragic situation on this remote island in Maine.
Right.
So she's a little bit braver than I think I was when I was that age.
Speaking of brave, Dan, you write psychological thrillers, which, just the thought of doing that for me is I'm fascinated by it because it's not a thing that I could possibly do. Every novel needs some kind of suspense and needs a thrill and tension and all of that, but you seem to be particularly drawn to that genre and do it quite well. And I'm just curious what the research and the background and how you determine the different character arcs and the villains versus the antagonist versus the protagonist and all of those kinds of things. The crafty part of writing this kind of book.
Yeah, I find that with psychological thrillers, you have to have somewhat of a plan, less pantsing, because there needs to be some strategic twists involved. You want to try to trick the reader, but not in a bad way, just divert them, if you will. And so, yeah, the research, it depends on the book. So I have the 10th book, it's unpublished right now, it involves hypnosis. Ooh. And so there was quite a bit of research involved in that. How does it work? Does it actually work? Is it a real thing? what can you do with it? And so, yeah, it depends on what the psychological lane of it is in that particular novel. But yeah, it does require more research than I'd even like. I just like to sit down and write. I can't imagine doing nonfiction. It seems like it's too much work. I'll just come up with the ideas and go from there typically. But yeah, psychological, I have had to do a little more research than I would with just some of the other more action-packed thrillers that I've done.
And in terms of setting, how do you determine the location and setting for a story? Like this, the both of us is in kind of Indiana, somewhat Indianapolis adjacent, not it's not located in the metropolitan area, really kind of a small town community, all of that. And it works really well because it's sort of like the normal life, the average husband, wife, and all of that, and then some peril enters the picture in this relatively normal appearing setting. So what is your process for determining where you decide to set a story like that?
So for me, setting isn't a big deal, and so for a lot of writers,
doesn't matter then.
Yeah, a lot of writers.
Really? Okay.
It's really important. It can be a character in some ways, but I honestly just pick a place. Okay, where haven't I written about before? And so when I first started out, I remember setting a goal. I said it out loud, which I don't know if I should have. I want to write one book set in each state.
Wow. Okay.
And so 11 books in, I have 11 states down, and so I just pick a place I haven't written about yet, and I use like Google Maps to try to be accurate in terms of roads and locations, but beyond that, you can really drop them wherever you'd like.
Wow, that's so interesting. Well, and that also, I guess, sort of in terms of your character, your male character's profession, and it was so interesting. I mean, so relatable that he's kind of got this annoying office colleague that's Todd. I mean, we all know a Todd, and he's often named Todd. No offense to Todds, but I mean that's so recognizable, and I think that probably is the value of being able to set a story like this in just sort of a very ordinary kind of place, and then have these extraordinary sorts of things occur. Speaking of extraordinary, I cannot not talk to you, Jen, about the monster itself, and how it came to you, how you decided to create its physicality, its hunger, I guess is the right word. And did you surprise yourself by delving into that kind of an element in a novel?
I don't think we ever surprise ourselves, do we?
I agree with
Sometimes you might come up with something and then read it back and say, wow, like what was I doing that night that I came up with that? So there had to be this contrast of believability too.
Yes.
And you're talking about somebody, there's a sole survivor of a mass incident and never spoken of it before, and it's from the 80s, so there's really little documentation and media of it back then, and everything is on microfiche.
And it was well covered up also.
Yes, and it was well covered up. So what's the truth here? And is this person making this up? Is this person, are they punking me? Is this not real? Or are we on a ride here? So there had to be an element of believability, but to him, and the way it was expressed as he recounted it to Marley, the journalist who came to interview him, it had to be as ferocious as I could make it.
You did a very good job making it ferocious.
So it was not that hard. If that sounds terrible, doesn't it?
No,
but
no.
I was just curious. Gore.
I was curious to know, and I'm squeamish in film viewing. I mean, I'm one of those hand before the face, tell me when it's over kind of thing. But reading it is not. I'm not as squeamish, I guess. But it was quite
intense.
Intense. That's the correct word. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But so I want to say accurately depicted, as though it had really happened. But it was so visceral and visual, and you managed the violence of the attack so well.
Well, thank you.
As I say, I haven't had nightmares yet, but it is a story and certainly an incident that stays with you. And I think every big lake probably has the legends and efforts to prove that there's a real there in terms of, Loch Ness Monster, which presumably is benign, but we don't know. And Lake Winnipesaukee supposedly has Winnie under there someplace. So that part of it also is kind of connects with a general knowledge of lake monsters and lake creatures, who I tend to think of, and I think we all think of as I say, benign, but not in this instance.
Are they?
But are they? And yes, we don't know if everyone's been eradicated who could speak to that. Then we don't really know, do we?
Right.
Both of your novels, I think, are very, I would say, filmic. They have those qualities that you can see the action and the characters and everything as if in a movie. So I wonder how you've been influenced by particular genre films like thriller and horror films. Is that any part of your process in terms of developing these books?
Yeah, I do watch a lot of thrillers, and I read a lot of thrillers. Ironically, a lot of the movies are based off the books, which says a lot. But yeah, so there can be a bit of a formula to them. I try to avoid the formulas while giving people what they might expect. Do I write for the screen? No, I don't. I think that'd be a dream. That'd be amazing to see it on the screen someday. But being realistic, probably not going to happen. But I'm open for business. I know that.
Never say never.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, a good publisher, a good agent. Well, I think that it would be a really good, a good film thriller. And what about you, Jen, in terms of specifically Rattlesnake Island? I mean, were you watching scary, creepy monster movies while you were writing it?
It's about to be the 50th anniversary of Jaws,
yes.
And the Vineyard is one of my favorite places in the world. So my son's name is Brody.
Oh gosh!
So after Chief Brody. So there's a lot that you connect to early on. I think The Shining might be one of the best psychologically thrilling. But it's not so much, it does have its gore, but the psychological suspense of that is visceral, and it sticks with you for decades beyond. So yeah, reading those books, watching those movies, you can't help but be influenced by that.
Before we conclude, quick last question, your best advice for other authors or aspiring authors. Dan?
My advice is very short. I say it to a lot of writers, is just write.
Just write.
Period. That's it.
Can hardly do better than that, but Jen, you get a chance.
I'm right there with Dan. It's a no excuse zone. Just give it a go. It doesn't have to be great right out of the gate, but just do it. Get those ideas on paper, in this case on laptop, and just see where it takes you.
Well, it's taken the two of you to some very interesting places, and your readers as well. I feel like I've hardly scratched the surface in terms of the volume of books that you've written. You've each written so much, and I'm particularly interested, Jen, in what's next for you. I think you said you got another narrative nonfiction, or
potentially another narrative nonfiction that I'm working on right now. A rom-com. I do have a holiday-themed rom-com that I'm working on. So yeah, there's a lot. There are some irons in the fire. They both need to season, at least the ones I have for now. So they need some more work. Not quite ready yet, but hopefully soon. And Dan, what's next for you?
Well, I have 2 additional novels written. One, the hypnosis one, is big-time psychological. The one after that's just more of a suspense, and then I'm about to start something soon. I just haven't fully dove in yet. I have it laid out because it is pretty dark, and so I have to decide if I want to go that dark. But I think I do.
Go that dark. Yeah, go dark.
I think you're well qualified to go that dark, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, my thanks to both of you for joining me today, and I know that Paul will be disappointed that he wasn't able to engage in this conversation, because he's a big fan of all kinds of books, and so he will, I'm sure, be one of the most interested viewers of the program. Thank you to Concord TV for hosting the show, and to Matt Arsenault for his wizardry in the control room. And we will see you next time on Turning Pages.
We're clear?